So we're going to talk about building an information security program from scratch. For those who don't know me, I'm Josh Sokol. I run the security team at National Instruments. I'm also on the OWASP Foundation Global Board of Directors. I've been on the global board for about 2.5 years now, and have one more year left on my term. And then I'm also the creator and CEO of a company called Simple Risk. Our logo is on the bag. It's a free open source risk management program. So I'm guessing where this all started is probably similar to you guys, right? It was back in the 1990s. Internet was just getting popular. It was the age of Beavis and Butthead, Zach Morris, Bart Simpson, and whatnot. And it really started out when I got one of these, modem, right? And I started playing around with this thing. I started connecting to the internet at that point in time, which was this. In the back of a newspaper, in the back of a magazine, there was a whole bunch of phone numbers, and you basically plug that into your modem, and all of a sudden you were connected to this, which was a BBS system. And this was actually the very early stages of what we call email today. It's basically, you would type a letter and it would bring you to the thing, and then you'd say, I want to send it to this user. And it was all isolated within that system. But this was my very first time kind of getting this communication between different people all over the area. Don't worry, it gets better, I promise. Moved from there to kind of playing some online games like Zork. And then from there, we got America Online. And this was really where the internet took a turn for me, because while I was on America Online, while everybody else was figuring out how to download fuzzy dog pictures and things like that, I found programs called AOL and other proggies, mail bombers and things like that. And so I started using those. And I started finding things that would bump people off the internet, and I started finding things that would steal account credentials and stuff like that. So I slowly started moving my way towards the dark side, right? And it took a turn even worse when I found IRC. When I found IRC, what I found was it was almost like a king of the mountain competition. It was basically like all these rooms, and you basically would figure out different ways to get ops in these rooms, to take control of the rooms. And then, of course, what you do when you get ops, when you take control of the rooms, you kick everybody else out and you play king of the mountain, right? So that was me. I would play with WinNuke. I would knock people off the internet. And that was me, right? That was my early days. And when I start to reflect back on this, I start to think about this and really how it relates to us as security practitioners, I come to my first lesson learned. And that is really that there's kind of a fine line between what's illegal and what's unethical. And I think in InfoSec, we really walk this every day. We start looking at, how do we screw with somebody, right? Oh, that person left their laptop unlocked. I should go and change their background to be, the picture of their desktop, and then they're going to click and not be able to do things, right? Not illegal, unethical, maybe, but I'm going to teach them a lesson, right? I think that we walk this every day. So, a couple other examples: testing without permission, right? No, really, my name is Robert Drop Table Students. There's nothing more fun than entering a name like Bill O'Reilly into a name field and then having that SQL error come up. You're like, yeah, I got them, right? Other areas where this comes in is things like full disclosure versus responsible disclosure. And this has been a really hot topic in our industry lately. At what point is it right to say, no, we're not going to wait for the vendor to disclose this vulnerability. We're going to go ahead and tell everybody because it's a problem. And I think this just came up like a week ago when Google disclosed a Microsoft O Day. And they only gave them a week to actually fix things before they disclosed it. So these things are very, very relevant today. As I grew older, I started to realize that these things that I was doing, not such a big deal when I was 10, 13 years old, whatever, but I could really go to jail as an adult. So I turned my attention a little bit. I started focusing on things like Carolyn Monell wrote the Guide to Mostly Harmless Hacking. And so I started looking at her Happy Hacker stuff, started looking at like the Anarchist Cookbook, 2600. And really for me, it was about finding ways to satisfy that thirst for knowledge without going to jail for it, right? And so our second lesson here is really take every opportunity that you get to learn, learn new things, but stay away from the dark side, right? We don't want to venture too far in that direction because that's where we get locked up in jail and bad things happen in jail. Eventually I graduated from high school and I decided that I really, really liked computers. And I liked them enough that I decided to go to the University of Texas, and I went to UT for computer science. The unfortunate thing with UT, while they had a great computer science program, I really, really enjoyed, I enjoyed there, right? I enjoyed being there, I enjoyed the classes. There was absolutely no security in any of the classes, right? Any of you guys CS students? Yeah, some of you. Did you guys have security in any of your classes? Not a one, right? And unfortunately, this is still a problem today, right? Most of computer science looks a little bit like this, right? It's a bunch of dudes sitting around playing with their floppy disks. And they wrote programs like this. For me, I learned a lot about things like how to program in Pascal, how to program in C++, how to program in Java. You guys get the idea, right? It was a lot of programming and not a lot of security. My takeaway with this, and I'm learning this more and more as my daughter gets older. I have 4 daughters, I know. Bless my heart. I hear that all the time, every time I tell somebody that. But as my oldest starts to get interested in this kind of stuff, she's starting to learn code and she's starting to get interested in the security stuff that I do. And it really brings me to my 3rd lesson, which is kids should learn to code at an early age. I think that this is the future of our society, right? Everything that we're doing comes down to some sort of automation, some sort of code, some sort of program. And so we really need to be teaching our kids from the very start, not only how to code, but the morals and the ethics that are involved with it. We need to be thinking about what are the ramifications of teaching these kids these things, because as the keynote yesterday said, they're going to learn it regardless, right? You stick a computer in front of a bunch of kids in Africa and they're going to teach each other. We have to be teaching them the morals and ethics that go along with that as well. And what that means is that secure development absolutely, unequivocally also needs to be a part of every curriculum and reflecting the grading, right? You build a SQL injection flaw into that program that you're doing for that class, that's a fail, right? Because in real life, that's a fail. If there's a SQL injection and you get popped and the credit cards get posted on the internet, your company can get put out of business. So I absolutely think that we need to reflect that. All that writing code and whatnot was kind of useless once I decided to become a system administrator after graduation. I decided that programming was cool and all, but it really wasn't for me. I wanted to do something else. So I kind of took the long road into InfoSec, and I'm guessing, and the other couple of times that I've done this talk, I kind of did a survey. I said, all right, how many of you guys also took this long road to InfoSec, where like you weren't here when you started, you didn't graduate and like instantly pop into an InfoSec job. You started as a system administrator, a developer, a DBA. Everybody else did not, right? No, everybody here did, right? And so for me, it was graduating with CS and then a whole bunch of system administrator roles. And then finally, I found a company, National Instruments, that was willing to give me the chance to focus full-time on security. So that was me. I found that it was kind of a double-edged sword. And what I mean by that is that on the good side, I got to dabble in security at pretty much every job I've ever had. But usually dabbling meant spending just enough time to piss off some people and then move on to something else because I didn't have the time to really focus in on that. It meant, on the good side, a very diverse background, which meant that I could be more helpful in a lot more areas. But on the bad side, that really meant that I wasted a lot of time doing things that I wasn't passionate about. And I'm sure you guys know what it's like to do something that you're not passionate about, right? And the last thing was that I earned the trust and the respect of people as a leader before I ever took on the security role. But again, it took a really, really long time to get there. So like I said, I'm guessing pretty much everybody in this room, based on age and whatnot, falls into that same category. None of us started there. Really, the only people who are starting in InfoSec are people who graduated within the last 3, 4, 5 years. So my lesson actually comes courtesy of my first job after graduation, which is that it takes a really shitty manager to show you the traits that make a really good one. My manager was an ex-Marine. He had that very Marine mentality. And he was just like, you know, we're doing this for the mission. And it was like, what mission? We're running a utility company. I don't get it. And then it was like, you know, he'd go to his boss and he'd tell his boss that all the work that I did was because of him. And it just, you know, it's really shitty. But then you start getting into this point where you start experiencing some other people. You leave that company and you start experiencing what real management looks like, and you start to get a better picture. And actually one of the people who gave me that better picture was my manager at Bearing Point. And that's where this next lesson comes in. He was really, really good at shielding us, at being the guy who protected us when something bad was happening. The only problem is, you know, when somebody holds an umbrella over your head when the shit's raining down, it has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, it rolled onto his head. My next lesson here really was courtesy of another job. I was doing a military contract, and they really didn't care about work. They cared about hours. And for me, that really translated to, you're going to spend a lot of time working here instead of spending time with my wife, who I had just married. It was kind of interesting. I was working there my very first weekend. I'd been there a week, didn't even have credentials on the systems. And it was Saturday morning, I get a call from the office manager. He's like, hey, Josh, you coming in today? I was like, wait, it's Saturday, dude. I was like, no, I'm going to the NAM showcase. And he was like, we'd really like you to come in today. It's like, Craig, I have plans and whatever. He's like, no. You know, we'd really like you to come in today. I was like, well, can't I have VPN access. Can I just do this from home? You know, what can I help you with? He's like, no, we just need you in the office. And so, you know, I learned this lesson kind of the hard way. It was like, you know, they didn't care about any of that stuff. It was just billable hours to them where, you know, I made X dollars, but then they doubled that for this company and doubled it for that company. And, you know, it just sucks. The next lesson comes from, I got a position as an IT manager. IT manager is a very generic term, and unfortunately, when you're in a position as an IT manager and you have nobody else to manage, that basically means scapegoat. Is really what it comes down to. And so, you know, you get put in that position where they're basically saying, you own all this stuff, and if anything goes wrong in any of this stuff, it's your fault. You're going to take the blame for it. The nice thing was, I didn't stay there very long. I ended up leaving there, and I came to National Instruments. And this, I think, is really where things turn, right? And this is where most of my lessons come from. I was hired on as a web systems engineer from there in 2007, January 2007, and it was kind of weird. For the first time, really, in my career, I had a team that actually gave a shit about me. They gave a shit about each other. We liked hanging out. We did team builders where we were like, you know, blasting lasers at each other and, you know, playing cool games, and we were generally like hanging out with each other. We were working together. It was awesome. And, you know, probably the best part about it is we weren't trying to stab each other in the back, right? It was cool. And the best part was my manager said, hey, I know that you have this interest in security. I know that you like this stuff. You know, obviously your job is this systems administration thing, but I'll give you 5% of your spare time to work on security. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's see what I can do. So the first thing I did is I got involved in OWASP. And as I mentioned, you know, I'm on the global board of directors now. But the way it all started was really just, I was handling the meetings for the chapter. We were setting up a meeting every other month at National Instruments, and I just made sure that the room was there, and, you know, somebody else would handle the speakers and all that stuff. And, you know, but it was an opportunity to kind of get involved from the beginning. And I started to, you know, I was already setting up the room, so I sat there and I listened to the presentations, and, you know, I started learning about this stuff. And I think the lesson here for all of us is really, you know, this was an opportunity. So when an opportunity comes knocking, you know, don't just stand there, open the damn door. These things crop up all the time, and if you don't learn to take advantage of them, they just pass us by. So for me, at first it was kind of a trickle, right? Just a little bit of water, just a little bit, but man, that girl's gobbling it up, right? You can tell she has passion when she goes for that water, right? For me, it was the same way. I just had that 5% of my spare time, but I made the most of it. And so this is actual graph. This came from, I was using Qualys to do network scans across the environment. I was trying to find the vulnerabilities in the area that I had influence over, and I was trying to fix them. And so I used this. This was my security average, and Qualys basically gives you a 1 through 5 score for each asset. And it's basically across all of the assets, they sum it up. And so this was how I started. I started by keeping this one little metric that said, this is where my security program sits today. This is the area of influence that I have, and these are the changes that I'm making. And that red line represents kind of where I wanted to be. That's my goal. If I can get security average down to a 2, then I think I'm sitting pretty well, especially considering where I started at. So you can see over the months, I little by little, at one point I got a system retired that had like an old version of Apache and an old version of PHP on it, got rid of that guy, huge drop there, and you can see we got down to that goal. And then every once in a while we'd put new systems on and it would spike back up, and I'd figure out a fix and we'd get back to that place. Now really what the lesson here is, you can talk about security all you want. You can talk about improvements, but it really doesn't mean shit if you can't back it up with metrics, right? And so as security practitioners, it's our job to show to management, show to our executive team that we're doing what we're saying we're doing. And we can't show them that we're doing what we're saying we're doing unless we actually have the metrics to show that. So from here, I decided that I wanted to help our developers. I'd learned some things watching the OWASP meetings. I had actually learned quite a bit. And I was like, I feel like I'm at a point here where I can kind of share some of this knowledge. I can sit down with them. And so I decided I'm going to have office hours. And I sent out an email to all my developers. I picked out a cube sitting right over by them, and I just sat there. And I kind of sat there alone for a while. Just me, but it really didn't matter. The thing that I was establishing wasn't the fact that I was having office hours. It was more about people seeing me there, seeing me present, seeing me as a resource that they could reach out to, and more importantly, I was an expert. I was somebody who, when it came to security, like, hey, if I do have a question, I'll talk to him. And before you know it, I wasn't sitting there alone. I actually had a line out the door. I had developers waiting to sit down with me in office hours because they had those questions, because they saw me as the expert. So our lesson here is that all the knowledge in your head is worthless until you use it to help somebody else. We need to make sure that we're helping our developers. We need to make sure that we're encouraging them, that we're teaching them the right things that they need in order to do their job. And sometimes that means sitting there by ourselves, but it also means making ourselves available so that when they do have that need, we're there when they come calling. So eventually for me, this was still in my 5% spare time, it came to the point where it was kind of do or die. For me, it was like, I really like the security stuff. I was very passionate about it, and I wanted to do it full time. And so what does anybody do when they decide that? They go out and they get another job offer, right? Well, for me, I love National Instruments. I've worked there for 9.5 years at this point, and I can tell you it is the most amazing company I've ever worked for. Very, very different than any of the others. And so for me, I got that job offer, and I said, look, I don't want to go. I don't want to go to this place, but I am very passionate about security. And if it comes down to it, I'm going to make that move. However, I would really like to be the security guy at NI. Well, NI didn't have a security guy. They didn't have a security team. They didn't, there wasn't any of that. So they said, all right, put together a justification. Tell me why you're the security guy for National Instruments. That's kind of easier said than done, right? How do I prove that I'm the person that should run the security program? I don't have the experience. I've been doing this in 5% of my spare time, right? So how do I do that? Well, it comes back to our metrics. So what I did is I did this full-time justification pitch. And I started with those metrics. I started by saying, security is my passion. I really want to do this, and I want to do it full-time. And then I backed that up with the metrics by saying, I'm damn good at this, right? Look at this, total number of vulnerabilities. You can see it going down, down, down. There's my trend. Hey, by the way, they added a system that had a lot of vulnerabilities in it. We fixed that shit. We went right back down, right? And then here's my risk average, the one that we showed earlier. And you can see that going down, down, down. And here's my discovered vulnerabilities by severity. These are all the Sev 5s. They're gone. Here's all my Sev 4s, they're gone. Here's my Sev 3s. You get the idea, right? That it's down, down, down graph. And after all these different charts, after me showing them all this stuff, I got to this slide. I said, this is why you want me to run your security program. I'm proven, right? I may not have 100% of my spare time, but I've been able to show you that in 5% of my spare time, I've already made some very significant difference for National Instruments. And just imagine in your mind for a second how much 95% more time would account for, right? If I can spend 100% of my time, I mean, this place is going to be rocking. Maybe not that, but it's certainly going to be better. Passion, right? In general, I feel that people work harder and they're happier with the things that they're working on if they're passionate about them. And so everything that I'd done for the past 2.5 years, I said I did without anybody ever asking me to do it. And it was out of a sheer desire to improve National Instruments, to make this company a better place. And then I got to the last piece, which was rational. And I think that this is something that a lot of security practitioners actually miss. Security should not be a roadblock. Security should enable the business. Our job, and if you attended the presentation yesterday with me and Karen, our job is risk management. Our job is to show them why these things matter in a way that's meaningful to them. Security is actually a collaborative effort. It's a negotiation between the business that's saying, here's the things we have to do, and security that says, okay, can we do it this way? Because this is going to make it more secure for us. It's going to put us in a better position. It's going to amount for less risk. And the thing that I told them is I said, look, I know that there's a lot of security people out there who are going to treat, they're going to bring out their big security stick and say, if you don't do this, we're going to lose our compliance. And if you don't do this, then, we're going to get in trouble with the SEC and, all these different things. So that's not me. I understand that the way that my company makes money is by being a business. It's not by being security. It's not by being secure. It's not by having an IT department or anything like that. It's because we sell products. And so I need to figure out how do I fit my security program into what they're doing, not fit what they're doing into my security program. So the end result is I got the job, but there was a caveat. And the caveat was, hey, we've got all this compliance stuff. We've got Sarbanes-Oxley, we've got some PCI stuff, and that's going to be job one for you. And any other time that you get beyond that, cool. Do your security thing. We don't know, we're not experts in security, figure it out. But this is what you're going to work on. And so I was like, all right, that sounds like a good deal. Beat compliance down to the point where it's a monkey can do it, right? Write scripts, do whatever. And really I got it down to the point where it took about 2 weeks every quarter, which that means that there's a lot of extra time to do the other stuff. But in any case, I said yes. And then there came the point where we had to figure out the job title. And so I was like, hey, I could be the Chief Information Security Officer. A little bit ballsy, right? But they were like, sorry, there's only 2 C-level people at National Instruments. It's our CEO, guy who founded the company 40 years ago, and Alec Davern, who's basically the CEO in waiting. He's taken over in January. But he's been at NI for 25 years, and he's the COO/CFO. So they're like, nope, can't do that. And I was like, okay, well, can't be the CISO. What about the security manager? That sounds like a cool title. I know some people with that title. Sure. And they said no. They're like, no, manager at National Instruments means that you actually have people, that you're actually managing people. So I was like, okay, well, I don't really have any people right now, I guess, so can't have that one. And eventually I kind of came to this conclusion that I could be the information security program owner. Makes sense, right? I own this stuff. So a couple of lessons coming out of this. The first one on the compliance side, I learned that compliance and security actually kind of go hand in hand. If you think about it in terms of risk management, our security program is all about creating controls in the environment. And when those controls fail, or where they could fail, that's a risk. And so compliance has to do with the controls and the auditing of the controls, so it's basically testing that. So really these two are kind of married together. And so having some ownership over the PCI piece and over the SOX piece actually meant that I had more visibility into this, and actually it meant that I had better visibility into the business aspect of this. I could see what's going on, I could know what's being tested, and I actually own this very important piece of business where if this doesn't happen, well, the company doesn't get to be a publicly traded company. We don't get to process credit cards. So that's kind of cool. But we can't use it as the stick. We can't say, well, PCI says if you don't do this. No. It's all about how do I help? How do I educate? How do I show people the right way? Now, the other thing that I learned here is around that name. What am I going to be called, right? And the interesting thing is on Tuesday, a vendor showed up here. It was a vendor I hadn't met before, but she met me, and she was like, oh, you're Josh Sokol. I was like, yeah, that's me. And she's like, you know, I always have vendors come up to me and say, can you get me a meeting with him? And because it's, you know, National Instruments, and it's this big company here. And, you know, it's really funny to me. The CISO title, I think it kind of carries a big weight in our community, but I don't really feel like it's the end-all, be-all. I think that we can all be CISOs without having that title. Because I think really what the CISO means is that you have ownership over the security piece and that you're seen as a leader. You're seen as an educator. You're seen as somebody who can help drive that program forward. And so I guess with this, I kind of turned to Shakespeare. And Shakespeare said, what's in a name? That which we call by a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I feel like that's the same way with the CISO, right? We can call it whatever the hell we want to call it. People will still look at you and they'll validate you the same way. It's not based on that title, it's based on what you do and how you do it. So the last piece here is that rational piece, and I want to take a moment to kind of focus on that. Security shouldn't be a roadblock, right? Collaborative effort. And the last lesson here kind of comes from the web systems team that I was on. I had a manager who basically said no to a lot of people. And he said no, unfortunately, without listening to their needs, what they wanted, you know, why they wanted that. And the end result of that wasn't that he got what he wanted, and it definitely wasn't that they got what they wanted from that conversation. It really just alienated them. It turned them off. And what do people do when they hear no, but they need to do something anyways? They find another way to do it. So all that did is it had them circumventing our team. It had them figuring out another way to go around and get the job done because that's what they're paid to do. So my question as I took on this security program was, how do I utilize this collaborative effort that I talked about doing? How do I integrate that into our current processes, take them into account, and build upon them? And so I came up with kind of a two-pronged approach here. The first was I had to be seen as a security subject matter expert. People had to look at me and say, yes, when it comes to security, that's the person who I need to talk to. He's the person who has the answers. And the second one is, in order to do that, people have to want to talk to me, right? They can't fear me. They can't fear that I'm going to tell them no, that I'm going to yell at them, tell them they're stupid, whatever, right? It happens all the time in our environment. And so I want people to actually want to talk to me. And I had we'll say an introspective at this point in my life. I used to play in a band way back when, before I even started at National Instruments. And we were playing with this other band, and it was their first time playing. And I was good friends with these people. The singer's name was Tish. And after the show, you know, Tish got off stage, and she came to me and she said, Josh, you know, what'd you think of the show? And I said, well, Tish, I thought it was a good show, but I said, I could probably draw a 1 foot by 1 foot box on the stage, and you would have stayed right inside that box the entire show. And, you know, she kind of walked away from that all like depressed and whatever, because everybody else had told her how great she was, you know, how amazing the show was, how good her voice was, and, you know, how good the band was, and all this other stuff. And I was the one person who had something critical. And the interesting thing for me was probably about a year later, Tish came to me and she said, hey, you remember when we first started playing? You remember that show at Hard Rock Cafe that we played with you? And I was like, yeah. She was like, I hated you after that show. And I was like, what? She was like, you were a dick. It's like, wow, okay. And she said, but I realized something. It's like, all right, this has to be good, right? She's called me a dick, and now she realized something. And she said, what I realized was that you were the only person who was being honest with me. You were the only person who was actually giving me something constructive, something that I could improve on. And I was like, cool. I mean, that's cool. That's validation. But what it validated for me, it wasn't what I said. It was how I said it, right? When I talked to Tish, obviously she was kind of listening. She was looking for what she wanted to hear. But when I told her, yeah, it was good, but it turned her off immediately. She didn't want to talk to me for a year, right? So I need to figure out how to phrase things differently. How do I relate to people differently? And I found some comfort in a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. This book, if you read about it, it's really meant for salespeople. But at the end of the day, what a lot of us don't realize is we're selling ourselves all the time. Anytime that you have an idea as a security practitioner, you have to sell that idea to somebody. Whether it's your management, whether it's to your spouse, your whatever, right? We're selling our ideas all the time. And so when it comes to this book, I mean, it's amazing. That's exactly what it focuses on. And so Dale Carnegie, brilliant, he says this is how you do it. You start off and you begin with praise and honest appreciation. It's a no-brainer, right? You tell people, thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing. And I think Shannon Leitz said this the other day at the keynote. And then you want to call attention to people's mistakes indirectly, right? You don't just say, hey, Tish, you were standing in that box and you didn't move out of it. You figure out ways to communicate what they could do better without just flat out saying, hey, that was dumb. You talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. And this came up in one of the other presentations too. They asked, who has built a SQL vulnerability into their app? And it's like, yeah, me. I've done that. I wrote a blog post a while back called a cross-site scripting vulnerability in every piece of code I've ever written, right? I think we've all been there. We're all fallible. It's part of what makes us human. And so I think that we have to be willing to talk about ourselves. And I think it gives, when we're talking with developers, it gives them something that they can relate to, right? Man, Josh is a great security professional, and even he's had a cross-site scripting vulnerability. All right, there's hope for me, right? Number 4, ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Don't just tell people what they need to do. Try and, if they're able to figure it out for themselves, if they're able to ask the questions, or if they're able to, you coach them on the right way to do it, it goes much easier. They come up with the answers. Number 5, let the other person save face. I mean, nobody wants to be the person on the bad end of the stick, the short end of the stick. Give them an opportunity to save face. Give them an opportunity to improve themselves. Praise the slightest improvement. Praise every improvement. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Use encouragement. And make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. These aren't difficult things to do. And really, when you look at them up there, you're like, shit, I could come up with that list. But these are the things that we usually don't think about. So Carnegie, I think, is pretty amazing in that respect. And I think that he does a really good job of showing us how do we change without offending people or making them resentful of the actions that we're taking. And this kind of leads me into my next lesson, which is change is difficult, but not changing is fatal, right? We have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to change how we're going to react to situations, to change how we interact with people, because if we don't do it, nobody's going to listen to us. Nobody's going to care. And then the next one, when we're talking with people, let's ask them about what they need before we start talking about what we need. Let's ask them, what are your requirements for this application? Where do you want to go with this? Where are we taking this down the road? Okay, we can handle that from a security perspective. Let's put this thing here. We can encrypt this. We can whatever. Our security conversation comes after the business requirements. And the cool thing was, it really worked. I wasn't just the passionate guy drinking from the trickle. Now I was the passionate guy drinking from the fire hose. I had so much stuff coming at me at this point in time that was like, where's my priority? What do I focus on? I've got 100% of my time to focus, but I've got a family, and I've got kids' soccer practices, and I've got all this other stuff going on, the OWASP stuff. Like, where do I focus? And at this point in time, it was like, okay, I need to do vendor security evaluations, and I have to do architecture reviews for that new stuff over there, and hey, I've got this scanning tool that's finding all these vulns, and my VP asked me to evaluate this NIST thing over here. Like, where do I focus my time? And this was about the point where I really discovered risk management. It was like kind of a light bulb went off. Because what I was able to figure out at this point in time was that risk management is really how we justify what to work on first. We look at the issues, we give it a risk score, that's how we prioritize where we're going to go. And I had another light bulb go off when I was like, wait a second, my business doesn't talk vulnerability. They don't talk threat agents and things like that. They talk risk. And so risk management is how we communicate our technical problems as security people to the business. That's how we get buy-off on the things that we want to spend money on. It's not by saying this is a cool EDR blah, blah, blah tool. It's by saying this is the risk that paying for this thing is going to mitigate. So that's where Simple Risk came in. And this is the free open source risk management tool that I've been working on. Now, when it comes to an application security program, which is why a lot of you guys are here at the Lone Star Application Security Conference, we did developer training on the OWASP Top 10. That was the first thing, right? We talked about educating. I wanted people to know, you can't tell somebody this is a cross-site scripting vulnerability if they don't know what a cross-site scripting vulnerability is. And they definitely can't fix it. So we did training. Then it was, let's get some scanning tools to find the vulnerabilities. And let's do it in production. Well, you know what happens when you find a shitload of vulnerabilities in production? They say, we need to know about these vulnerabilities before they're in production. All right, so cool. Let's put one of these tools in test, right? And we'll find a shitload of vulnerabilities in test. You know what happens when you put that in test? Same question. We need to know before they're in test. So it's like, all right, well, let's find some tools to put in the dev environment. And my developers came back and said, we don't always use dev. All right, they don't use dev. How do I do this? And so this is kind of where we're at today. We're playing around with some stack analysis stuff. We're trying to figure out, hey, can we get the code when the developer checks it in, run kind of an on-demand scan, maybe at build time, and do that, and then basically live feed those results back to the developer, integrate with their API. So this is what we're playing with today. The lesson here is that once you develop an appetite for security, the hunger grows. People want more and more security, and they want more information, and they're going to want it sooner, right? It's a good thing. It really is. So if you're doing it right, the demand is going to increase. We want to make sure we're leading by example. So what this means for us as security practitioners is passwords. Use really complex, really long passwords. I absolutely love it when I can sit down with somebody and be like, here's the password that I use for this thing. Here, let me open it up and let me show you it because I know you're not going to remember it, right? It's fun. And what that means is that we have to use password managers. We have to use that because that's the only way that we're going to be able to have that many long random passwords across every single one of our sites. And I said this the other day, but it also means using HTTPS for everything, even for those shitty little work intake forms, right? HTTPS across the board. And the cool thing is EFF about a year ago came out with Let's Encrypt. Now you can get an HTTPS SSL certificate for every shitty little form in your environment. And even better, they've created APIs that allow you to automate this stuff, right? It's awesome. And unfortunately, yes, this also means running the corporate antivirus, the anti-malware, the anti-whatever that's mandated in your environment because we have to do that too because we have to lead by example. And then the last one, don't get hacked, right? You get hacked, you're probably a poor example as a security practitioner. So what that means is eat your own dog food, right? Don't tell somebody something and then turn around and do it differently. What this also means is we need to quit being dicks to users, right? Everybody has to start somewhere. And being a dick means that they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to look to somebody else. And if they're scared of talking to you, if they're intimidated, then they're going to go someplace else. And the best case is you may need something from them in the future and you won't get it. And the worst case is that they're going to hide the things that are bad that you don't want them to do, and they're going to make sure that you don't know about it. So InfoSec needs to be about education and needs to be about evangelization. Hiring, you can teach people just about any skill, but you can't teach them passion. So when I hire, I want to hire people that eat, that sleep, that breathe security. I want people who go and they go home and they play with firewalls, not because it's their day job, but because they love it, right? Not because it's a paycheck, because it's fun. And that leads me to the last lesson here. InfoSec is fun, right? And so you guys, you need to be passionate about what you do. And not only that, but you have to show others that you're passionate about it. And if you can do that, if you can show them how passionate you are about InfoSec, then they're going to share it with you. So thank you.